High on the hill overlooking the Sewn lies the Croix Rousse district of Lyon. It's here that the remains of Lyon's famous silk weaving industry still work. Lyon is famous for its painted walls commemorating aspects of the city's history. Of course, there's one about the canoe and the silk. A legend in his lifetime, there he is on the wall. Monsieur Matalon put me straight on a few things. Ah yes, of course, that's the worst insult. You must never call a weaver a canoe. In his workshop, every inch of space is taken up with looms, which he demonstrates to the increasing numbers of people interested in his craft. He tried to explain to me that the card on the top of the loom carries the design of the material he's weaving. He told me that the card had worked twice in its career, once in 1830 and once again in 1955.
Deux fois, 1830-1955.
Kafar, which are the little things through which you pass the threads of silk, used to take 8 threads at once. That made it possible to weave the design and the background at the same time. Modern machines have one kafar for each thread.
De cette façon, on fait le fond et le dessin en même temps.
My head was soon in a whirl as I attempted to look as though I understood the first thing of what he was telling me. Moving on to what I hoped was a safer topic, I told him how beautiful his workshop was. He told me his was one of the rare workshops in the Croix Rousse which had windows on both sides. Usually you had one window and the family lived on the other side. The looms were classed as historic monuments in 1995. I asked him if he'd been classed as a historic monument yet. No, I haven't been listed, not yet anyway. At 88, he still has a mind like a steel trap. If anything, my next visit was even more astonishing. Madame Letourneau makes pasmenterie, which is a gold braid that is sewn onto officers' uniforms and priest robes, etc. She told me her father had started the atelier in 1909 and that she'd been born in the apartment right next to the looms. She said she was 89 years old, 1 year older than Mr. Matalon.
C'est juste un peu plus de Mr. Matalon.
Oui, j'en ai plus.
Non, plus.
Oui, d'accord. Oui.
Those are for the church. When the French priests stopped having decorations on their robes, I worked 20 years for the Russian Orthodox Church.
Ah bon?
Ça allait en Russie, ça.
Oui,
Ça, là,
oui.
Parce que là-bas, il y a encore l'église orthodoxe,
Oui,
ils sont quand même des chasubles, comme on avait en France avant. Mais alors, je vous dis, quand j'ai commencé en 54...
When I started in 1954, we used only pure gold thread. We did that for 3 years until the Japanese invented gold plastic thread, but it was useless because you couldn't put it in the washing machine. Before 1914, everything was gold. After that, it was gold-plated silver thread, and now it's completely plastic.
On a remplacé, ça fait que maintenant, je n'ai plus d'or. Avant 1914, mes parents, tout l'ornement d'église, c'était en or. Après, ça a été de l'argent doré, et maintenant, c'est du plastique. Mais quand mon père est venu,
When my father first arrived here, the loom didn't have a motor. When he was 14, he had to do this for 10 hours a day to drive the loom like a horse walking round and round in a factory. It wasn't painful, but he couldn't stop. Up and down he went like this.
Alors tout le long comme ça, en se promenant, et il fallait tourner. Attention, attention. Attention. travaillé.
I've worked for 54 years on these two
sur les deux
looms
métiers,
here.
Les deux métiers puis la canetière. Il y a 10 ans seulement,
Only 10 years ago, there were looms in all the ground floors on both sides of the street.
là, il y avait des
Here we had
passementiers au troisième
pasmenterie
étage.
looms until
Tout
the third
l'immeuble,
floor.
c'était des ateliers.
All the buildings were full
Des
of
métiers
looms of
différents.
all different
À chaque étage, il y
kinds.
avait des métiers.
Now they're all
Eh
luxury
ben, maintenant,
flats.
c'est les studios
I'm the
de
only
luxe.
one left.
On est les seuls qui restent de là aussi.
Have
Bon,
courage,
courage,
madame.
madame, courage.
That's the way it
Ma
goes.
foi.
Gold and silver threads are perhaps not used by Madame Le Tourneau anymore, but there are plenty of rich sheikhs who like a bit of gold in their burnous. There's silver thread, which has golden-coloured plastic wrapped around it, and then there's the real gold thread. I was surprised to find that not all gold threads are the same colour, and the skeins have to be carefully graded by colour. Of course, there's always the military who like a bit of adornment. Whilst hordes of tourists peered through the windows, I was privileged to get inside this fascinating workshop. In the strange half-world of ancient weavers eager to show you how they spent their lives, it was a pleasure to meet Agnès Aluzet, who actually makes her living weaving silk velvet. Agnès works entirely alone in complete concentration, never answering her doorbell or phone while she's working for fear of losing her threads. Silk velvet is where the threads woven into the background to make a pattern are cut to produce the velvet effect. This cutting is a highly skillful business. If you cut the wrong threads, the whole loom has to be rethreaded, a process which can take months. She explained in a whisper that this morning it was 22 degrees and silk doesn't like changes in temperature like that.
C'est curieux, ça c'est parce que
That's curious. Is it because the silk stretches?
Disons qu'il faut que ce soit assez.
The silk has to be fairly
assez
humid to
humide.
work well.
Oui.
If it's too hot,
pouvoir
the
bien
silk
travailler.
dries and becomes brittle and
Donc
electric.
s'il fait trop chaud, ça sèche et la soie devient cassante et électrique.
How many threads have you got there?
En tout, j'en ai 8000.
In all, 8,000. 8,000? I found the work Agnès was doing was quite astonishing. She counts herself lucky if she weaves half a yard a day. The next man I went to see is unique. That's to say there's no one else doing what his family have been doing for the last 100 years. Mr. Maire does moi.
Ce sont des règles qui servaient à moirer.
Moi is that watertight pattern on the silk and is done by crushing the silk in a certain way under an 8-ton pressure. In the olden days they had a huge machine to do it, as in this picture. The boys showed me how they did it nowadays with a machine that's only 100 years old. The silk is folded in a certain way and placed between sheets of brown paper. Then it's wound into a tight roll. The roll is then placed between heavy rollers to make it as tight as possible. And finally it's placed in the 8-ton machine, which presses it really hard to get the moire effect. When the roll is opened, the material shows the moire pattern effect. Monsieur Maire and his team moire some very expensive materials.
Ah, ça là.
In the midst of the Croix Rousse is a jolly establishment called the Rendezvous of the Weavers. Jeff and his wife, Janine, run the place themselves. I asked Janine where she'd met her husband. She told me she'd met him at a dance in Monceau-les-Mines.
En allant danser.
Janine told me with refreshing candour that she had learned her excellent cooking out of cookery books. Jeff, son of an immigrant Polish miner, is Lyon's most extrovert patron. His endless supply of bonhomie somehow complements his wife's cooking.
Ça, il monte au monsieur du fond.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Before I left, I was sort of kidnapped by La Grosse, a very large woman indeed, who told me she'd been a silk weaver for 45 years, and she was going to show me the Silk Weavers Museum, whether I wanted to see it or not. All you have to do, said La Grosse, is to wind up the thread onto the bobbins like these and start weaving. A startlingly simple explanation for what is clearly a very complicated craft. That's soft, she told me, and that's harder. Guessing wildly, I asked if it was taffeta. Yes, it's taffeta, she said. That's got gold thread running through it, and that's got silver thread. Round the corner at Roger Gavazio's shop, Madame Riva fascinated me as I watched her paint a square of silk for a scarf. All she uses is a bit of cotton wool which she dips in the various coloured dyes, and a lot of experience, of course. Andrei Canova has a large establishment, Silkscreen Printing Scarves for the luxury market. He showed me around his factory, which was just outside Lyon. With this method of silkscreen printing, a screen perforated in exactly the place each colour is to be printed is placed on the table. The right colour of ink is placed on the screen, and then the screen is transported over the silk and the ink applied. Here they're only doing a sample, but if they want to do a big run, they clearly need a very long table.
Ce qui vient, moi j'ai toujours été
Andrei
fasciné.
Canova told me ever since he was a little boy, he was fascinated by the brilliance and richness of the colours of the carousels and the circus. I always have these colours in my head, he
Tout est
says.
scintillant, tout est beauté, tout est riche en couleurs. Et cette richesse coloristique, disons, j'ai toujours eu dans la tête. Et il est vrai qu'un manège, si on peint, si les chevaux sont
It's true that if a carousel had its horses painted black or grey, no one would want to ride them. A child would be frightened to get on.
Il faut lui donner
You have to attract
l'envie
people
de
with
monter
colour.
sur. Donc il faut lui donner des coloris attractifs.
Voilà.
Donc ça a toujours été ma démarche. Mais à Lyon, c'est ce qui est...
Oui, oui. Je trouve que c'est comme ça. C'est tout les choses.
I said I thought Lyon was a bit like the circus. Everything was a mini spectacle, the bouchons, the brasseries, etc.
C'est vrai, lorsque on voit ça, a fait la richesse...
Yes, that's true. That's what gives Lyon its richness and its fame. The House of Prel is one of the world heavyweights in the silk weaving business.
Je
The
vois ce que
boss,
vous voulez dire.
Guillaume Versier, told me a bit about silk. Silk, he said, was natural fibre. It changes with humidity and heat. You mustn't forget that a thread of silk the same length and diameter is stronger and more resistant than steel.
À taille égale, à diamètre égal, est plus résistante et plus solide que l'acier. Et une forte variation de température, une forte variation d'humidité fait varier
Changes
la
of
longueur.
temperature and humidity
Et quand
change
vous
the
avez
length.
plusieurs milliers,
When you have
plusieurs
thousands,
dizaines
tens of thousands of silk
ensemble,
threads
ici,
together,
ça
it
peut
can
casser
break
les
the
machines.
loom.
Et combien vous avez ici?
Yvette,
How many
Combien
threads have you
d'actifs
got
en
there?
chaîne sur la chaîne de
Yvette, how many threads have you got on your loom? 9,000
Ça
and
c'est assez
something.
mal.
200 et 2400.
Ça c'est assez.
That'll do.
un petit peu moins de 10 000.
A little bit less than 10,000.
Et la force de ça, c'est possible de casser ce métier.
And the
complètement.
force of that
Cette force
is
est
enough to
considérable.
break the loom.
Cette force est considérable et si on part
The force
pour
is
une période de
considerable.
plusieurs jours,
If you leave the
sans
loom without
détendre,
loosening the
on
threads for a
écrit,
long
on
weekend,
peut avoir très
you'll have a
mal
very
cherché.
nasty surprise when you come back.
Le tout début du tissage.
Ça c'est
Puisque
génial.
le tissage
We are
peut
right at the
durer
beginning of
normalement
weaving some
14 mois.
material to replace some curtains that Mrs. Gloria Vanderbilt ordered from Prel in 1890.
200 mètres.
The job will take about 14 months.
La moitié. La commande
The
est
order
d'une
is for
cinquantaine
100
de
yards,
c'est-à-dire
and we hope to
80
weave
mètres,
half a yard a day.
Et on pense pouvoir produire 50 cm par jour.
Et vous
Et un jour,
I asked Guillaume how he got the order.
la Preservation Society
One day, the
nous
Preservation
a
Society of
envoyé un
Newport
courrier en disant
sent us a
que nous
letter
avons eu
saying
vos
we've been given your
coordonnées
address by the Metropolitan Museum, and they sent us a tiny sample and a photo of the curtains they found in the bathroom at Marble House. Do you know who
Dans la
wove
salle
this,
de
they
bal de
wrote?
Marble House, un dessin, voilà la photo du rideau.
Oui.
Est-ce que vous sauriez qui a fait ça?
Oui.
Et Madame Dubelaine, notre archiviste, a dit « Oh, Je connais le dessin.
Madame Vollens, our archivist, said, I know this design. She found the order book of the period, the date of the order, the number of meters woven, the name of the weaver.
Et dans les livres de commission, on a trouvé la date de la commande de Monsieur Alain, le nombre de métrages qu'on a fait, le nom du tisseur.
Even the bundles of threads that were used as a sample.
On a tous les éléments.
Vous avez un petit morceau.
Whilst he was rummaging for the Vanderbilt sample, he came across a sample of fabric featuring pheasants that had been ordered by Catherine the Great for her palace in St. Petersburg. Someone in America wanted it copied, he said. He came up with a Vanderbilt sample without difficulty. In the factory, they have some modern machinery. But this loom is over 90 years old and is irreplaceable and is the only one that can weave this kind of brocade. After a few weeks, I went back to see how they were getting on with the Vanderbilt order. After lots of difficulties, they were about on yard 4. Silk velvet weaving is a tricky business. Imagine making a false cut and all those threads under huge tension going ping. You'd have to start again from the beginning. I thought I'd seen just about everything in the silk weaving game, but pasmenterie, they really are into the real Ritz.
C'est un atelier de tissage, mais cet atelier de
The
tissage...
boss told me this workshop is set up specially to weave this beautiful material. There are no modern techniques which can do the same job.
Autrement que comme vous les avez vus faire.
Mais vous avez un métier ici qui travaille pour
I believe you have a loom that's weaving something for Versailles.
En permanence un métier qui travaille pour
Yes, we have a loom that's permanently working for Versailles. We have a special order for 19 meters of material, which will take 2 years to complete. That's a few centimeters a day. That'll give you some idea of the complexity of the work.
dont vous pourrez tout à l'heure admirer la complexité du travail.
With 27 colors in this design, the complexity of the design is measured by the number of
La
colors.
complexité de ce dessin se traduit aussi par le nombre de couleurs qu'il y a pour lire ce dessin, puisque un seul raccord fait 44 000
There are 44,000 cards for one repeat of the design. I have to say, I was completely stunned by this travail. There's no one in the world who could copy this work, even if they had the inclination, because the cards with the design are unique. Back at the other end of the studio, they were knocking out silk velvet at a speedy half a yard a day. The wealth of Lyon was built on the fortunes of silk and the rippling waters of the two great rivers, the Sewn and the Rhone.